The poem Freedom to the Slave is about a liberated slave as he is physically released. The speaker expresses the feelings of the newly freed slave. Anti-slavery movement in England was the time period of late 18th and 19th centuries. It was the movement to end the practice of slavery in England. The poem was written when the anti-slavery movement was prevalent in England. The poem recounts the experience of a recently released slave. Derozio seems to have been influenced by the humanitarian ideal of the West. For instance, the influence of Thomas Campbell is seen in the lines, "And as the slave departs, the man returns." The line is extracted from Campbell's poem, The Pleasures of Hope. It is a long poem about the downfall of Poland in the hands of oppressors and hopes for improvement in the society. The speaker was curious about the freed slave's state of mind. The speaker was thinking about what could be the slave's feeling when he was first told that he was no more a slave. The slave became excited, and the speaker was curious to know how his heart would beat when he was made aware that he was finally independent from the shackles, from the chains of bondage, the cruel slavery. The slave was no more kneeling down. He stood up on his feet. His thoughts were elevated as he stood up. He started to feel himself a free man. Kneeling means to have lowered one's self in front of others. In the state of slavery, a slave bows down to the master or the superior ones. The physical posture of bowing down also suggests withdrawing oneself to the others. Here in the poem, as the slave got freedom, he rose on his feet, which suggested the mental elevation of the slave. The slave was free from the status of a slave. The slave looked above and felt the fresh wind. He smiled with joy and excitement to see the wild birds flying freely, the running stream that is flowing beneath him. Then the slave thought of them, that he was also like them, free like the winds, wild birds, and the stream. The poet uses the imagery of the winds, wild birds, and stream. Through this vivid imagery of natural elements, which include the wind, wild birds, stream, the poet conveys the slave's emotional state of mind. Like the fresh winds, the slave also felt fresh as he was announced independent and free. The slave was elated, overjoyed to see the wild birds, because, like the wild birds, the slave now could roam freely without any restriction. Besides these winds and wild birds, there was another element of nature that complemented his sense of freedom in the poem, and that is the stream. The relentlessly flowing stream implies free life, where there is no inhibition, no restriction. The idea of freedom of the slave is indicated through this imagery. The way the slave exclaimed, I am free as they. So, this juxtaposition is made to make the situation of slave more clear in front of the readers. In the next part of the poem, the speaker addresses freedom, and freedom is personified. The speaker eulogizes freedom, oh freedom, saying there is a very special in its name that kindles the altar of the soul with endless flame. Glory to the brave heart that bleeds for freedom, and let nobody be bled. And blessed the generous, the kind hand who shatters this chain of bondage. This chain of bondage is given by a tyrant, a cruel person. And then there is this empathy with this slave. This empathy is what gave him freedom. The speaker says that the patriot achieves success when the patriot's sword is uncovered for freedom, which means the patriot is ready to fight for freedom. The speaker hailed glory to the one whose chest is injured and the gush of blood flows in the name of freedom. The speaker also praises the kind hand that breaks the chain, that is bound by an autocrat, a tyrant, a cruel ruler. And the speaker empathizes with the miserable condition of a slave. So, after seeing the downgrading condition of the slave, the man gives freedom to the slave. In most of Derozio's poems, the reflection of patriotism is discernible in his poetic expression. Here, too, in this poem, Freedom to the Slave, the poet praises the patriot for sacrificing life for the nation and bringing freedom to the land. So we see that there is this mixture of patriotism that resonates in the poem, just like his other patriotic poems like To India, My Native Land. The other one is The Harp of India, are filled with this feeling of patriotism. Other poems that I've just mentioned, To India, My Native Land, is also about freedom. In this poem, Derozio uses the image of a golden bird to refer to the past glory of India. The Harp of India also celebrates the glorious past of India and also at the same time mourns over the loss of its glory because of the invasion of the British Empire. In this connection, it can be justified that burning nationalistic enthusiasm, excitement, zeal is a very notable feature of Derozio's poetry. The poet uh, praises the man by referring to as generous hand that breaks the shackles of slavery from a tyrant and empathizes with the feeling of a slave, which becomes the reason of the freedom given to the slave. So we see that the poem has a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, B, D, E, F, E. The second line rhymes with the fourth, but every